Thanks, Darren. It's great to be back here to just report on the progress from the CIHR team. The title of my presentation today kind of made it a little bit more specific. I'm still the same person, and it's exploring the reshaping of identity within the context of a new HIV diagnosis. So I really jam-packed the slides, and so I think a lot of the top parts of the slides are going to be cut off. So that just says presentation outline. So I just want to spend a little bit of time introducing the study and the study objectives and our methods. Also just kind of highlight what the focus of today's presentation, and that's the psychosocial impact of the diagnosis. There's certainly a ton of data that's being collected in this study, so I don't have the opportunity to kind of delve into all the different components of the research. So the focus today really is looking at some of the quantitative measures that relate to the psychosocial impact, but for the most part focusing on the qualitative data and the emerging themes regarding psychosocial responses following diagnosis. So I've listed the 6 themes there, and I hope to spend the majority of today's presentation just kind of going through the different categories and issues that kind of underpin each of those categories, which are often overlapping and interrelated with each other. And then just have a few points for discussion and conclusions. So this sort of gives you an idea of the range of objectives and questions and interests that the CIHR acute HIV study has. I should mention that our project received funding through the Canadian Institutes of Health Research Emerging Team Grant Program, which supports new and emerging research teams who have not worked together on the same problem or issue for more than 5 years. And our funding amounts to just under $500,000 for 5 years for each year. The objective that I want to focus on today, obviously, is describing the psychosocial responses to newly acquired HIV, to describe the post-intervention experiences of acutely infected MSM. So this provides a bit of an overview of our study methods. So this is a mixed method studies employing both quantitative and qualitative methods. It's a longitudinal cohort study that follows guys from about a period of 1 year and potentially longer. We began recruitment for the study in April 2008, and the expected end date for recruitment is about September 2012, although that might increase or be extended. The eligibility for the study, so men have to self-identify or self-report as being a guy who has sex with guys or self-identifying as gay. They have to be 19 years of age or older and be given an acute or recent diagnosis in the GVRD. And I have a star there just because our study leaves the possibility open to doing follow-up with gay men who are given an acute diagnosis from anywhere in the province. And just a point of clarification for those who are not aware of this term acute. The acute phase is a period of increased infectiousness that's characterized by high viral loads for a period of approximately 2 months following the actual infection. The whole concept of recency, that's defined in our study as someone who has who tests positive on an antibody test, but has had a negative test result in the last 12 months. So last year's presentation was really focused on describing the methodology around the enhanced HIV testing algorithm that's used for all specimens from men over 18 that's collected from these clinical sites. So in addition to the standard third-generation antibody test, our study utilizes a fourth-generation antibody antigen test, as well as nucleic acid amplification testing to shorten the window period for detection of HIV. Just a quick note, we currently have 11 participants in our study. That makes up 5 acutes and 6 recents. There's a combined total of 10 visits over the course of 1 year. There are 6 quantitative components that consist of a self-administered questionnaire as well as an interview-administered sexual networking instrument. The qualitative component, it's a semi-structured, face-to-face, in-depth interview. The interviews were recorded and transcribed verbatim, and initial thematic analysis was performed for this presentation. So this table just shows you the demographic profile of our sample. So you can see that for age, the average age of the participants in our study was 39.1. Most of our participants were Caucasian, although there was some representation from other ethnic groups. The majority had completed college or university, and the bolded ones just obviously show what the most frequent responses were. Most of our participants were working full-time, were single, and resided in Vancouver, and most of them lived alone, either in their own apartment that they rented or that they owned themselves. So the hospital anxiety and depression scale, this is taken from Zygmunt and Snaith. It's basically a self-screening instrument that's commonly used by healthcare providers to determine levels of anxiety and depression that a patient is experiencing. Patients are asked whether they've experienced a range of feelings associated with anxiety and depression over the past week. And that first bullet point under that, minus 8 to 10, over 10. Those are sort of the guidelines in terms of assessing what this, the participant scores on this particular scale. So you can see that for depression, the mean score was 5.27, with a which basically reflects one participant having borderline depression issues, one having clinically significant depression. For anxiety, the average participant scored 11 on this scale, which basically means that 1 of our participants was borderline and 5 were clinically significant. We also assessed history of depression and anxiety, and you can see there that 6 participants had experienced either past or current issues relating to depression and anxiety, but there was also high prevalence of people who had actually accessed some support, whether that was treatment or counseling for their mental health issues. So this table just shows the output for the quality of life scale that was used in our quantitative instrument. So this is an HIV/AIDS targeted quality of life scale. It's a commonly used instrument to measure the quality of life, variables that are relevant to people living with HIV and AIDS. We include in the questionnaire scales that measure health, sexuality, and disclosure worries. I've only put up the disclosure ones because those ones were the ones that we felt that were most relevant for this presentation. Participants are asked to reflect over the past 4 weeks on their worries relating to these issues. So these questions are all about their anxieties and worries about disclosing to other people, and specifically about their newly acquired HIV status. You can see from judging from the responses that there's a high degree of worry and anxiety around disclosing and providing information about their HIV status. So the focus of today is really just to provide a preliminary analysis exploring the emergent themes within the area of psychosocial responses to the HIV positive diagnosis, as well as the identity formation that's happening for these guys after they get their diagnosis. So this particular research builds on other research that's taken place with gay men regarding identity formation and HIV. I've included just we did a very quick review of the literature and found some good articles on sort of other research that's been taking place on identity formation. I include one quote from Sharma's, which the struggle to redefine one's identity is a central task facing chronically ill persons. Now, this was sort of just a reminder, a refresher for us in assessing what we were finding in the interview transcripts, and it was just a very helpful kind of way of interpreting what we were seeing. Oh, that's not good. What it should say there, the first sub-theme is coping with social stigma. So the most important thing that participants were looking for from their social networks was acceptance and support. And they avoided disclosing to those that were perceived to be less knowledgeable and hence more ignorant around HIV. And this tended to be people that were HIV negative. Those participants who had relationships with people who are positive had a much easier time coping with the diagnosis relative to those that had little exposure or interaction with others who were HIV positive and sort of a less need for counseling. The second sub-theme of the qualitative data is just the impact of the diagnosis on family and work. So this just raised issues around fear of being stigmatized or discriminated against at work. Most participants were guarded around disclosing at work for fear of just being treated differently than they were before, and there are some worries about how it might affect their career prospects. And the quote here, just the first one, I just only included one there. This sort of reflects some of the logistical challenges of keeping HIV diagnosis private at work, which is more difficult during the immediate period following diagnosis and all the required blood work that takes place after the diagnosis and the follow-up with providers. So the third sub-theme here is the impact on intimate relationships. So many participants had some experience or worries of not being lovable, whether that meant being able to maintain an existing relationship or find a new partner. And certain fears around developing intimacy with someone who they worried might ultimately reject them if they found out that they were positive. So this quote comes from a participant who was in a serodiscordant relationship. His partner was HIV negative, and he was worried that his diagnosis would end their relationship. And this concern seems to be rooted especially in his perception of what he would have done had the situation was reversed. And this seemed to be an important theme for the participants in just part of their process in coping with their diagnosis was just kind of confronting sort of their own attitudes around HIV and HIV positive persons, which relates very closely to the fourth sub-theme here, and that's just the attitudes towards HIV. So a lot of people felt like they had to reconcile previous attitudes and perceptions of HIV. HIV as a death sentence, the side effects from the days where AZT was the main treatment, who is responsible for prevention, and a lot of these guys feeling that it's positive guys that or they used to feel that positive guys had a greater responsibility to disclose their status. So the first quote here, I'll just read it out because I think it's really important. I would have maybe said, "I'm sorry, but I'm not interested or comfortable with dealing with someone somebody with HIV. But yeah, that was my first experience of somebody just sort of ignoring you because of your HIV status. So his own experience of being rejected, to feeling not being lovable or desired by someone. And then this was just an internet encounter, but he relates this experience to his former identity as an HIV negative person, and is sort of grappling with these issues. And the second quote there, I thought anyone that it happens to, and that's becoming infected, in this day and age, they have to be, high on crystal meth and getting fucked bare by 35 guys and that kind of stuff. So this participant here, he's sharing his thoughts about his previous attributions to how people currently become infected, and that's reckless drug use and sexual behavior, including unprotected sex with multiple partners. This distinction between who was infected before we knew everything about HIV and HAART was available, his own experience of becoming infected, he didn't feel that he fit into that category of, reckless sexual behavior and rampant drug use. He believed that he was practicing safe sex, and he believed that his partner was HIV negative. So his own experience of becoming infected problematizes these notions and are part of his own coping process to his diagnosis. So the fifth sub-theme up there is sex as an HIV positive person. So all participants dreaded the idea of passing on the virus to someone else and felt that they had an obligation to tell their sexual partners if they were going to engage in higher risk sex. And that was specifically unprotected anal sex with an HIV negative partner. So, there are some mediating factors like seroconcordancy, type of sex that's being had, whether that's oral sex or protected sex, and maybe there might be some variation in sort of the disclosure policy, and also the type of partner that that was being discussed. A lot of the participants had worries around rejection, and felt a need to change or just stop having sex altogether following their diagnosis, particularly for those who felt that who were told that they were acutely infected and had a high viral load. The whole notion of sex was just out of the question for them. The first quote there just sort of describes some of the adjustment that takes place for a positive person when they're going online and how they grapple with the issue of making sure that that person knows that they are indeed HIV positive, and some of the extraordinary lengths that you have to go to ensure that they really know, just because of all the fears around being charged with not disclosing their HIV status to that person. So all those issues around criminalization and disclosure, and the increased responsibilities for those who are HIV positive, or at least the perceived additional responsibilities for these guys, that that takes a lot of adjustment for the guys in our study, at least. And the second quote there just sort of describes one participant's experience and how his diagnosis has affected the sex that he has with his HIV negative partner, and how that has just been a difficult shift for them, and how it's affected their relationship. So the sixth sub-theme, and it's the last one, is just the whole theme of the future as an HIV positive person. So, there's a lot of excitement in the HIV AIDS community about the advances in treatment and the reduction of side effects and, much easier drug regimes, from taking multiple pills a day to just one a day. But one thing that needs to be reminded to everyone is that newly diagnosed persons experience a lot of confusion regarding what it all means. And they do get a lot of support from their physicians and their care providers, but it's an incredibly difficult issue that it takes a long time for these guys to process. And this whole issue of treatment anxiety, on the one hand, there is an understanding and recognition of the negative health impacts of being infected, the inflammatory effects on the body, and a desire to become undetectable, which would reduce anxiety about passing on the virus to someone else, as well as avoiding the stigma that exists both within HIV positive and HIV negative communities. This whole perception of being less positive and hence less likely to reinfect and looking positive. But on the other hand, there's uncertainty about the long-term side effects of new treatments, and have they been studied long enough to even know? These guidelines from some of our participants' perspectives have changed rapidly, and there are still some concerns out there about what impact it will have on how they look to other people. And some participants had expressed some worries around this fear of looking like you're on HIV medication. But I think one often forgotten point about the diagnosis, which I think for those people that have a lot of supports in their lives, a lot of protective factors in terms of coping with the trauma of the diagnosis, is that there is some form of a silver lining to the diagnosis, and that's specifically not having to worry about becoming infected anymore, which needs to be recognized as a source of considerable anxiety among HIV negative guys. And so, one upside to the diagnosis for some of these guys is, well, at least I don't have to worry about getting that, because I was constantly afraid of it, and it caused a lot of depression and anxiety for me. Some discussion and conclusion points. So I just want to reiterate that this whole all the complex psychosocial processes that are at work relating to the HIV positive and or gay identity formation has some very important implications for care providers and support staff. It's a unique process for each individual given their lived experience and their current circumstances, whether or not they're currently in a relationship, whether or not they enjoy some existing peer support from other gay HIV positive people. And the preliminary data is showing that those who had intimate relationships or close friendships with those with people that are HIV positive, they have much better coping skills relating to their diagnosis, and this is reflected in terms of accessing information, getting emotional support around the diagnosis, which is so critical. Those that don't have sort of these protective factors around the diagnosis, these guys might especially be in need of support programs. But it's important to realize that there are significant barriers for these people in accessing support, whether that's guilt about their infection, whether or not it's kind of exacerbated by a lack of awareness, knowledge, and experience around HIV. So our study team is pretty multidisciplinary, and that sort of just is a representation of all the collaboration that takes place, and the collaboration in which the study relies upon. So certainly a lot of support from across community and public health stakeholders. And I just want to thank the CIHR operational team, Malcolm Steinberg, Bill Coleman, Lauren Bailey, Cory, Genereaux. These guys kind of take care of the day-to-day operations of this project. Michael Rekart, the study's nominated PI, and all the study investigators, our community partners, BCPWA, CBRC, and HIM. And I also forgot to list our clinical research partners as well. Finally, all of our research participants, without them, we would not be able to do this research study. So, thanks.